Our world needs a sustainable economy, but the transformation to being sustainable is complex. Yet leaders that move quickly can see massive opportunities before them. I'm Joel McCower. Join me as I talk to the trailblazers who are showing us all how ESG has moved from responsibility to opportunity. I'm here with Rick Lacaille, Executive Vice President and Global Head of ESG Initiatives at the financial services company State Street. Rick, thanks for joining us.
Thanks for the invitation.
What was your path to this role?
Well, I've been in the investment business for a long time, and by that I mean the asset management business. That's how I entered the financial services industry. And for the 12 years leading up to this role, I was our global Chief Investment Officer at State Street Global Advisors. And I saw the growing importance of ESG as a driver of returns and risks from an investment perspective, but also recognizing that State Street is a servicing business. Its clients are asset managers as well as asset owners. And the role was really in recognition of the importance of coordinating properly, not just as an asset manager, but across the whole range of activities of State Street to make sure that we're maximizing a positive impact. So it's different. It's very different from our previous role. But I'm enjoying interacting actually with people and corporations that were previously competitors when I was in the investment business, now being valued clients.
So Rick, you lead State Street's ESG efforts across its policies, its products, initiatives, thought leadership. How do you think about the role of ESG at State Street in this moment?
Well, we carry out every couple of years what they call a materiality survey, where we look at how State Street impacts its different stakeholders, shareholders, the communities we operate in, the employees, and also importantly, the clients. And we gauge which are the important things from their perspective that may not be captured necessarily in a kind of orthodox financial framework. And that gives us a list of things that we should be paying attention to. They range from things like the employee experience, inclusion, and diversity, all the way through to data privacy. And of course, climate change is a critical one for all of us in the financial sector. So that materiality survey gives rise to a range of things where we need the board and the management to be focusing attention and for us to set up the appropriate policies and metrics that ensure that we achieve good results there.
And does that list, the materiality list of topics, change from time to time, or has it been pretty consistent?
It's been pretty consistent in terms of a core set of things. And I think that shouldn't surprise you because the nature of the company itself is evolving for sure. But we're in the same business substantially that we were in 2, 3, 4 years ago. Expectations change and standards change, but we've got a core list of things. And they're reviewed every couple of years and approved by our board.
What might be something that would surprise people that is material to State Street that maybe even you didn't recognize until you saw that?
Well, there are things that I think people would recognize are important for State Street to pay attention to. We are a globally systemically important bank. So it's very important that we're operationally resilient, that we pay attention to things like cyber risk. Now, you could say, well, why is cyber risk an ESG issue? Or why is data privacy an ESG issue? That's sort of a business as usual issue. But I think it's very important to consider the ramifications of those issues, cyber or data privacy or operational resilience, particularly for a GSIB if they're not managed well. And that's when they become, material to other stakeholders. So I think while they're not surprising as things in themselves, often they're not thought of as ESG issues.
Well, on the investor side, or asset management and asset owner side, you know well that the impact of an organization like State Street is really in the loans it makes, in the financial products it sells, in terms of how you can drive your customers to decarbonize or make other changes in the environmental, social, and governance realm. What do you see the role of State Street being in that, and how has that changed in the past few years?
Well, we always had an important role as an asset manager. we are large as an asset manager. We're well known for our indexing business, and that's a business where you own pretty much everything in the stock market and also in the credit market. So from an ESG perspective, a lot of the things that you're doing are addressing the big picture issues like climate change, and ensuring that through engagement and stewardship and dialogue with boards and management, that those risks are managed appropriately. In other parts of State Street, we're serving those customers who are asset managers themselves or asset owners. And one of the most important things we can do is provide them good transparency into the portfolios they own, and thereby give them good choices in terms of how they manage those E, S, and G risks. So we're a service provider that provide data, we synthesize the data, we integrate it into their front office systems that we provide, and make sure that they're able to deliver and do a fantastic job. But it's also important to bear in mind on our own organization. So much as we think diversity and inclusion is important in the companies that we invest in, we need to make sure we're doing a good job within our own four walls on things like inclusion and diversity, but also our carbon footprint. So thinking about our data centers, our use of renewable energy, that's important for a large financial services organization. So we've got, in a sense, three roles. We're an investor, we're a provider of servicing products, but we're also a large entity in our own right that needs to pay attention to its own footprint.
I imagine balancing those three things can be a challenge. What are some of the challenges you've experienced?
I think they're not in conflict. That's an important thing to bear in mind. I mean, philosophically, in the investment organization, we recognize the importance of ESG, and we also make sure that that's recognized universally in the way that we approach our customer base. So if it's important for us as an asset manager, it's probably important for other asset managers too. Now, we know that things are different around the world geographically, and there's different focus and different regulations. And as a global company, we've got to understand, how to help our clients differently in different places. But also as a corporation, our own right, through these 8 material issues that we've identified, we're making sure that we're not being inconsistent in saying that ESG is important, but within our own corporation, maybe not spending enough time on it. So I think there is a consistency. It's not in conflict, and I think the approach we've taken is consistent both, in a sense, cross-sectionally in different areas of the world, but also over time.
So ESG has received a certain amount of pushback over the past year or so, and some of that's the political stuff here in the United States, but some of it is more global in looking at the difference between how companies talk about ESG and creating a better world, but actually the ESG ratings don't really measure a company's goodness so much as their risk profile. How are you navigating that? Are you getting more questions and concerns about the role of ESG data in the investment world?
You're absolutely right. Data is a really big challenge, and you have to sort of chase it all the way back and say, well, why is data and why are ESG ratings, inconsistent or challenging? And the root cause is that you're asking for information which companies are not necessarily obliged to disclose. So they may disclose it, but in a way that's not entirely consistent between one company or one country and another. Now, there is light at the end of the tunnel, so to speak, in the form of global initiatives like the ISSB, the International Sustainable Standards Board, who have proposed, and building on the work of IFRS and Sustainable Accounting Standards Board, proposed something that would give more consistency to the types of disclosures that you had company by company. That would help enormously. It wouldn't be the end of the story, because I think many investors always have an appetite for more information, and therefore they're going to want more information from companies, and then you've got this consistency challenge. I wouldn't want to overemphasize the fact that it's just a data problem. And I think this question of greenwashing as well is a little bit of a complex one for the following reason. Boards and management may have very authentic and highly credible plans, but they're often plans involving quite challenging forecasts about the future. If you're, for example, in an industry where it's very hard to eliminate your carbon footprint with known technology at the moment, you may still have a very strong aspiration to move towards net zero and to maintain sustainable profitability, but you may not know exactly how to do it. And I think that creates this data challenge. You've got aspirations, you've got partial information, and that can be a little frustrating for people. And they often conclude that, companies have this aspiration, but it may not be authentic because they haven't got a firm plan as to how they're going to get from A to B. But unfortunately, the facts get in the way of this issue a little bit because, the technology, the regulations are not necessarily always in place. So it's a challenge. I think it's becoming easier, but I think we'll face tension in this area for some time to come.
Yeah, the greenwash thing is really interesting. And not that many years ago, it was just a term that people accused companies of when they didn't believe that their actions met with their aspirations. But now it's legal terms, at least in Europe and in the UK where you are. How is that changing how State Street operates or thinks about ESG?
Well, in our own asset management business, obviously continuing to be careful in matching closely how we're actually managing the assets we've been entrusted with and the way that we're describing either the product or the investment process and approach. That's not actually to do with ESG, that's to do with making sure that we're communicating clearly. So if you think away from ESG for a minute, if we were managing a strategy that was in emerging market debt, and we said that inflation and politics were important influences, then making sure that that investment process explicitly took those things into account. So I think with investments, it's all about marrying the message with the actual process. And I think State Street on a broader level can help its clients in that area, away from the asset management, but into the servicing business, by providing them really rock solid data that can demonstrate that what's in the portfolio is consistent with what the managers intended and what's been communicated. I don't think it won't solve all problems, but I think data and transparency is enormously helpful in closing that gap between the investment process and the way that it's been described.
Another criticism of ESG is that it's all about the data. And granted, everything you said about data quality and consistency is critically important here, but that it's more about data and reporting and ticking boxes than it is about actually transforming businesses, let alone markets and economies. Do you see that those two things in conflict? And how do you see the role of State Street in that conversation?
I think it's interesting you mentioned this point because it implies there's a sort of risk of reductionism that you say, well, if I can't prove it with a piece of data, I'm not doing it. And I think there's a grain of truth in that. But the most important data in investments is future, in a sense, forward-looking data, not backward-looking. So if I own a company in a hard-to-abate industry like cement, for example, it's sort of interesting and relevant to see what my exposure is to carbon in terms of this year's output and what risk I've got to a rise in the carbon price. But what really matters for us as investors is what the sustainable profitability of that company is in 5 years and in 10 years as we go through a lot of transformation and they maybe fulfill an aspiration to start making green cement. Now, I don't know whether that's a data problem. If we reduce everything to the current data that's readily available, which would be their CO2 emissions or the carbon intensity this year, we may be missing the point. That business may be in transformation. It may be quite a long-term transformation, but its attractiveness as an investment, but also its positive impact on the wider world can't really be described unless you understand what that journey looks like into the next 5 and 10 years. And so I find myself agreeing with you that there is a risk that we reduce everything to the current data set that's available. And that would narrow the problem too much, I think.
Yeah. So what's the big untapped opportunity presented by ESG at State Street?
The big opportunity, frankly, is for both us and our clients in recognizing that we are going to have several decades of quite substantial change in the way that we are producing energy around the world, using energy and in the construction of value added in those sectors and in many others, and coupled with a very large capex requirement to make that transformation, I think that will result in many risks and many opportunities. If you look at when this type of economic transformations happened before, for example, in the 19th century with industrialization and the growth of railroads, you had booms and busts. It was a very productive process end to end, but it was also very turbulent. And so I think State Street can help its clients, both as an asset manager, as a servicer, by understanding more clearly what the risks and opportunities are and helping them to navigate it. So I think it's in front of us. I don't think it's an immediate, it's going to happen next year and then it'll be done. It'll be a multi-decade process, and we need to be prepared for it.
I imagine there's some new business models, new products and services, new kinds of partnerships, public-private, philanthropic, for example, that we need for this transition financing to get invest what we need to develop this clean, circular, just economy that we talk about. Is that what you see in State Street's future as well?
Yeah, I think there's parts of this transition that are pretty straightforward. You know, you need to build more renewable energy. We kind of know how to do that. There's a financing and infrastructure job to be done there. But equally, part of the transition's managing the negative effects of what is already, in a sense, coming through the pipe in terms of climate change adaptation. And for that, you do need to be a little bit more creative. I mean, the financial system needs to be creative in the way that it uses multilateral development bank funding, the blended finance, and State Street certainly is active in that area through partnerships like the Sustainable Markets Initiative in really getting people together to cultivate great ideas about how we could, you know, be creative, not in a negative way that we had probably back in the early part of the millennium, but in a more positive way to blend finance in order to address some of the more difficult areas. As I say, the easy ones are easy. They're profitable. They're businesses that we know have a very nice cash flow. But particularly in the emerging world, there is a need for finance that will help address some of those adaptation risks. And I don't think that can all fall on onto the balance sheet of local emerging market countries. We need to think how private finance can be initiated as well. And I'm certain that State Street is making a contribution that's positive there.
So when you and I talk again in 5 years, what's the story you hope to be able to tell about ESG at State Street?
I think continuing commitment to helping our clients is by far the most important thing that I'm absolutely certain we'll be talking about in 5 years' time. ESG is a shape-shifting thing. You know, there are domains that are growing now, for example, nature-related risks, biodiversity, risks embedded in or opportunities in artificial intelligence and the ethics that go around that. So to support that, State Street, both as an asset manager as a data provider, I'm sure will be continuing to be a trusted partner, and also ensuring that we remain focused as we're fiduciaries on doing the right thing in the long term to deliver great returns for our clients as an asset manager, and to help our clients do the same. So I think there's a lot of opportunity, and State Street will remain a partner for those clients who are embedding it into their businesses.
So many issues, so many opportunities, so little time. Rick Lacaille, thank you so much for the conversation.
Thank you.